roommate told me I was out of his league and then made me breakfast the next morning like nothing happened. That's the whole situation. That's what I've been carrying around for 3 days. Let me back up. Dominic and I have lived together for 14 months. We met the way people meet now, through an app, the roommate finding kind, which feels important to clarify, because the story sounds different if you don't. I was moving to a new city for work. He had a 2-bedroom he couldn't afford alone. We talked on the phone for 40 minutes before I'd even seen his apartment, and by the end of the call I'd already decided. Living with Dominic is easy in a way I didn't know living with someone could be easy. We have the same noise threshold, the same tolerance for mess, the same instinct to leave each other alone when alone is what's needed. We cooked together on Sundays. Somewhere around month 4 I realized I was structuring my evenings around when he'd be home. I didn't do anything with that information. I filed it under things to examine later, and kept examining it at 2 in the morning approximately 4 times a week. He's quieter than me, more careful. He grew up in a house where being too much of anything was a problem, which I understand only from the edges, because he doesn't talk about it directly. What I know is that he second-guesses himself constantly in ways he thinks are invisible. He'll suggest something and then immediately offer to cancel it. He'll say something then look uncertain about whether it landed. He apologizes for things that don't require apology. About a month ago, things shifted. Not dramatically, just the accumulation of small things moving in one direction. He started sitting closer, started lingering at the end of conversations like he didn't want them to finish. There was a night we fell asleep on the couch watching something neither of us cared about, and when I woke up my head was on his shoulder and he was awake and he didn't move until I did. I started paying close attention. 3 days ago was a Saturday. We'd been at the kitchen table for 2 hours, just talking. The kind of talking that's really just an excuse to keep being in the same room. It was raining. The apartment was warm. He was laughing at something I'd said and I was watching his face and I just thought, I'm done waiting for a better moment. I said his name in a way that was different from how I usually said it, and he heard the difference. I could see it. I said, I need to tell you something and I think you already know what it is. He went still. I said, I'm not asking for anything. I just needed to say it out loud. I've been in love with you for about 10 months and I thought you should know. The silence lasted long enough that I started preparing for the kind of quiet that means no. Then he said, you shouldn't be. I said, that's not really how it works. He said, I'm serious. You've got everything sorted and I'm still figuring out basic things and you deserve someone who's already arrived somewhere. I said, arrived where? He said, you know what I mean. I said I didn't. He looked at the table. He said he'd been broke until 2 years ago. Said he'd made bad decisions for a long time and was still climbing out of them. Said he looked at me and saw someone who had it together and he didn't want to drag that down. I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, I moved to a city where I knew no one and had a panic attack in a grocery store 3 weeks in and called my mother from the cereal aisle and cried for 20 minutes. I said I have a spreadsheet for my anxiety because if I don't externalize it, it lives entirely in my body. I said I haven't spoken to my father in 2 years over something I still don't know how to name. I said I have it together the same way everyone has it together, which is to say partially and temporarily and with considerable effort. He looked up. I said, I'm not a destination you arrive at. I'm a person who makes coffee and argues about movies and fell in love with you somewhere around month 4 and has been quietly losing my mind about it ever since. Something moved across his face. He said, month 4. I said, the night you drove 40 minutes to pick me up when my car broke down and you didn't make a single comment about the inconvenience. He said, that wasn't a big deal. I said, I know, that's why. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I don't know how to do this right. I said, neither do I. I said, we could probably figure it out together. He reached across the table and put his hand over mine. That was 3 days ago. Yesterday morning he made breakfast and didn't mention any of it, and I thought for one terrible second that he decided to pretend it hadn't happened. Then he slid a plate in front of me and said, for the record, month 3. I said, what? He said, that's when I knew. Month 3. You fell asleep reading on the couch and I put a blanket over you and stood there like an idiot for probably too long. I stared at him. He said, I just wanted you to know the timeline. Then he sat down and ate his breakfast and I ate mine. I thought about all the months we've been carrying the same thing in opposite pockets. Some things take longer than they should. They still get there.